As the technology of video games continues to evolve and their popularity and presence within digital culture greatens, their potential as an art medium has continued to grow and be explored. Using graphics, audio, and gameplay elements, video games can create immersive experiences, presenting a space for the player to explore, challenge themselves, and overcome obstacles. Within these digitally crafted spaces, the opportunity for stirring deeper emotions and feelings within the player is present. It is through these spaces within the medium of video games that the sublime can be achieved. There are many different game genres out there, but here I'd like to focus on the genre of single-player story-based adventure games. This choice is not to discredit the ability for other genres to convey the sublime, but more so to examine the sublime in video games through a more classical lens, acknowledging and taking inspiration from the sublime ideologies of thinkers such as Kant and Burke, and recognizing the importance of the individual in experiencing the sublime. This game genre puts the player into the protagonist's shoes, with the protagonist representing the player within the digital space. Having control over this character helps to form an intimate relationship between the player and the game. Single-player games allow for an individualized experience, furthering this connection. By adding the element of a narrative story, the player is more vulnerable to experiencing greater emotion. When the character struggles or succeeds, the player experiences those same feelings. The importance of player-character connection in achieving the sublime can be seen in the 2008 survival horror game Dead Space and the 2019 action game Death Stranding. Both games present protagonists that exhibit everyman qualities, not particularly skilled or fast or strong, and certainly vulnerable to the dangers they encounter within their games. Many video games fulfill our power fantasies, letting us fill the shoes and have control over powerful heroes. However, by making the main protagonist a rather unremarkable character, the player can more closely associate themselves with the protagonist, creating the avenue to experience feelings of hopelessness against the threats within the game. In addition to having strong player-character connection and representation, both games excel in their immersion, with their game interfaces minimal as to avoid distracting the player or taking them out of the experience. In Dead Space, this is done by incorporating the game interface into the digital environment, with the protagonist's health displayed on his spine as part of his spacesuit, and in both games, menus and heads-up displays appear as holograms, projected from their character's protective gear. Immersion is clearly an important element for both video games and the sublime. A crucial part of creating immersion within a game is being able to stimulate the natural. Nature is also an important element of the sublime, with the idea of one feeling insignificant in the threatening force of nature, stemming feelings of the sublime. Realistic graphics, game physics, and mechanics can help to achieve the natural, while game parameters such as invisible walls, limited mobility, broken physics, and distracting game interfaces can take away from conveying the natural. Immersion also involves the idea of the player giving up their control to the game itself, bound by the digital world and restricted in their physical senses while being heightened visually and auditorily. This phenomenon is reflective of the sublime ideas of being vulnerable to the force of nature and the overwhelming/heightening of the senses. When both immersion and strong player-character connections are present, the incorporation of uncertainty and the unknown can be a successful element for conveying the sublime. The unknown can symbolize many things within video games. It can be defined as game elements for which we lack knowledge of, exhibiting obscurity, and, in the context of the sublime, they possess a sense of danger or risk to the main protagonist. These could be new levels, land territories, and enemies, or less specific elements, such as darkness and fog. What makes video games compelling with conveying uncertainty is that the medium can incorporate movement, patterns, puzzles, and other game mechanics into its exploration and discovery. Rather than leaving it to the player to imagine the implications and what-ifs of exploring the unknown, it makes experiences out of diving into uncertainty. The key elements that make a game successful at conveying the sublime, uncertainty and mystery, along with strong player-character relationships and immersive world-building, are all present within the works of game developer Fumito Ueda. Ueda's games all pertain to a similar visual and narrative style. They introduce the player into a world that's grounded in nature, but has residual elements of the spiritual and supernatural, giving the surrounding environment an ancient, powerful, unknown quality. Ancient temples, mossy ruins, and crumbling towers and bridges are all trademarks of Ueda's game environments. These environments alone can create feelings of the sublime in the player, as these settings can make the player feel small and insignificant within them, the massive crumbling ruins of civilization indirectly showing the strength and force of nature. The narratives of his games are similar as well, often throwing the player into the world and giving them a simple task. In his first major work, Eco, the player is tasked with protecting an unnamed unknown girl and escaping the eroding fortress with her. In The Last Guardian, the player is tasked with escaping the crumbling temple with an unknown, giant-winged, tailed beast named Trico. It's only as the player begins to explore the world around them, and as they complete said task, that they can discover, question, and interpret the environment around them, whether it's to try and understand the inner workings of the technology and culture left behind, or to uncover the true nature of the beasts that threaten them. There is always a constant feeling of wonder and mystery within his game environments, which can make experiences when the player encounters the unknown feel richer and more primal. His ability to create feelings of the sublime through encounters with the unknown can be seen most evidently in his sublime work, Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus is one of the best examples for describing the sublime in video games. Taking place in a massive open world, free of loading screens, invisible walls, and smaller enemies, it puts emphasis on the massive, empowering qualities of nature, symbolized in the steep cliffs, expansive deserts, dense forests, and crashing waterfalls of the surrounding world, and reflected in, most importantly, the 16 colossi. The colossi are unique in their presence as video game bosses, as most of them don't actively pose a threat to the player. It often requires the player to attack first before the colossus fights back. This behavior makes approaching them a truly sublime experience, as the player can sometimes quietly observe the giants, experiencing fear and the sense of looming threat while from a safe distance. Approaching them for the first time and diving into the unknown can inspire sublime feelings in players as they enter a scenario which leaves them vulnerable to the wrath of nature, this wrath symbolized by each colossus. It is his ability to capture the essence of the unknown, depict a believable, natural world, and portray the ever-looming greatness and strength of nature that makes Ueda's games sublime video game works. His works stand as examples of pushing the boundaries between art and the digital world and are prime representations of how the sublime can be conveyed within video games.